Wait. Is this new?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is new. New unit.
What chapter is it?
Chapter
Wrote
26.
on paper stuff that looked like math.
Chapter 26.
Oh, I hated that. I don't think she teached it very well either. I didn't know what I was doing.
Okay, so we're starting a brand new chapter, brand new unit. It's probably going to consist of this chapter, Origin and Diversity of Life. It will consist of viruses, which I hope to cover tomorrow. And then I'm going to spend 2 days on prokaryotes. And I think I'm debating if I want to include protists. I think I might add protists to, no, okay, maybe I won't. So that means we're going to have an exam like next Tuesday. Okay? All right. That's why I'm recording. Okay, so first section is called Deep Time. So we're going to talk about the history of Earth, which, is going to be kind of redundant because we watched a short little video last Friday on this. So you're going to recognize some of the terms that they used and just look at the relationship between these geological events and the evolution of life. So Earth's history can be divided into 4 eons, and then underneath the eons you can have eras, and underneath the eras you can have periods, and then underneath the periods you could have epochs. But the first eon is called the Hadean eon, where there was no rocks, pretty much was Earth's first 500, 700 million years of life. Then we have our Archean, where we find the oldest fossils of prokaryotes, and this is kind of where life emerged. And then with our Proterozoic, we have the oldest fossils of our eukaryotes. We see evidence of cyanobacteria and oxygen in our atmosphere because before we didn't have oxygen in our atmosphere. And so the Hadean, the Archean, and the Proterozoic are called the Precambrian period or era. Because in the final eon, we have the Phanerozoic, where we see multicellular organisms emerge. So this is a nice little summary of the geological periods, but it uses different terms. So there's the Precambrian that includes 1, 2, and 3, and then this is all Phanerozoic. Okay. Now, the evolutionary clock, where it says 1 hour equals 507 million years, all this red is like the Hadean, then all this blue would be the Archean, and then we kind of enter the Proterozoic and then our Phanerozoic. But you can see that humans show up on the clock at 59:59. So we're, like I said in that video, literally a blip in the history of Earth. I think they said that the Phanerozoic, the last era here, is only 12% of Earth's history. And if you just look at mammals and birds, it's 4% of Earth's history, and humans are 0.2. So, all right, now, during Earth's history, CO2 levels have shifted and thus affected temperatures. In early Earth's history, we had high levels of carbon dioxide and water vapor. When you decrease CO2 levels in the atmosphere, your temperatures decrease, and you're going to see this trend a lot. And it goes on to say, well, there's been points where ocean and atmospheric CO2 levels were in equilibrium because you have volcanoes giving off CO2 gas, but then CO2 can be trapped in land and run off into the ocean. So you can add CO2 and you can take it out. So that's what they mean by equilibrium, equal rates going on between atmosphere and land/water. Our continents have moved over time due to plate tectonics. With plate tectonics, we have to be aware that earthquakes occurred, volcanoes occurred, and as a result, plates move. So we've had a couple different supercontinents in the past. Pangaea is the most famous, but we did have Rodinia and Gondwana. So every year our plates do move a few centimeters, and over time the effects obviously can be astounding. So
Is EQ earthquake?
Yes. Okay. So the next slide is going to show a figure that is also in your book. It breaks down the geological history as well as major events that have occurred in Earth's history. I'm not going to go through this in depth, but here's Hadean, the oldest rocks. Here's the Archean, where we find our first evidence of prokaryotes. Then the Proterozoic is where we find evidence of eukaryotes. And then this is where we get multicellular organisms up here. And then over here they show you the supercontinents, Rodinia, Gondwana, and then Pangaea. Okay. All right, review questions. As scientists work on explanations of the development of life on Earth, they are keenly interested in understanding conditions on early planet. Part of this understanding involves the effects of change in atmospheric CO2 levels. Predict the most likely outcome if CO2 levels dropped rapidly. Yes, you drop your CO2 levels, your global temperatures will decrease. Moving on to origins of life. So we're going to compare today's atmosphere versus atmospheres that were at the end of the Hadean eon, and then some key steps that were obviously very necessary for life to originate, but there's still a lot of unknowns, so everything pretty much in this section is like a hypothesis. So we don't know how life began, but we do know a few scenarios. Life probably started in the chemically rich oceans. And that before cells, we had to make organic molecules because cells are made up of the 4 macromolecules, or the 4 big organic molecules: carbs, nucleic acids, proteins, and lipids. And these organic molecules had to form from inorganic molecules. Okay. So this, starting out in oceans, the oceans back then were dilute, they were hot, they were basically a smelly soup of ammonia, formaldehyde, formic acid, cyanide, methane, hydrogen sulfide, as well as some organic hydrocarbons. So it's just a big, hot, smelly soup of things. How these organic molecules originated, here's where some hypotheses come into play. First off, maybe some of those organic molecules are extraterrestrial. Because in Earth's early history, it was being bombarded by meteorites and comets during the Hadean and Archean eons. So this is the panspermia hypothesis. Some evidence that kind of backs this. We've analyzed meteorites, specifically one called the Taglish Lake meteorite that hit British Columbia back in 2000. And when we looked at the weight of it, 3% of it was organic. So there's a pretty good possibility that some key organic molecules came from space. But another point we have to take into a fact is we can't rule out life on other planets quite yet. So I'm going to talk about Jupiter's moon Europa. I'm going to talk about Mars. And now that Perseverance has landed safely, its main job is to look at, I forgot the name of the crater, it starts with a J, for evidence of life. So I meant to make a slide over the weekend on it, but I just never got around to it. So. But Perseverance is actually kind of cool. I watched the launch with my daughter over the summer, and then we watched it again last week. Like, it landed. It's kind of scary, but everything worked flawlessly. And this one's kind of cool because it actually has a built-in helicopter drone, so it can fly up and take aerial views. So they're hoping, within a month or two, that they can take it out and use it. So I don't know. I think it's cool. Okay, Jupiter's Europa. So Jupiter has some big moons, and one of them is called Europa, and it's kind of like an ice moon. And it's ice, so that means that there's a possibility that there's water underneath this thick layer of ice. Now you're probably thinking, Jupiter, geez, that's really far away from the sun. It's a gas planet. But because Europa is under extreme gravitational forces from Jupiter as well as the surrounding moons, it undergoes tidal heating. So it actually probably has heat, so that's why they believe there's liquid water underneath it. So Jupiter, good possibility that there that life could start there with its deep, rich ocean underneath it. So, yeah. Mars. Okay, so we have endurance on Mars, but now we also have perseverance. I probably should change the slide and talk a little bit about it. But we've detected presence of methane and liquid water found on the surface. We've looked at cross-section of bedrock that shows liquid water formation. We believe that there were some shallow seas and they were probably acidic. And so the big question of why there's no, like, maybe we don't know if there's life on Mars, but why did it die out? Like, so, yeah. All right, moving on. So early Earth conditions. Early Earth's atmosphere was considered something called a reducing atmosphere. It contained a lot of hydrogen atoms with electrons. So it's not going to take a lot of energy to drive chemical reactions because hydrogen wants another electron to fulfill its outer energy shell. So it's going to react with basically anything. It's not going to take much for it to bond to other things. And so Miller and Urey back in 1953 reproduced conditions on Earth with their famous experiment, which I'm going to show you on the next slide, and then I also found a short video on it. But here's Earth's prebiotic atmosphere. You can see that there was a lot of carbon dioxide, water vapor, methane, ammonia, hydrogen gas, carbon monoxide, nitrogen gas. And today's modern atmosphere, you can see that a big part of it is, I shouldn't say the big part of it is oxygen, but we have oxygen present, nitrogen present, water vapor, argon, methane, and CO2. So we had a lot more CO2 back then. CO2 in our present atmosphere makes up less than 1%. Actually, I think it's less than, yeah, it is less than 1%. And everyone's kind of freaking out about the CO2 levels, but whatever. Okay, so here's their setup. So what they did is they created the atmosphere, the reducing atmosphere. So they added a mixture of water vapor, nitrogen gas, ammonia, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, methane, and hydrogen inside this like glass apparatus. And then they set up a heat source with a heated ocean because Earth was pretty hot back then. And then the most famous part of it, though, is that they ran a current, and this was supposed to simulate lightning. Okay, so they closed it off, so this was a closed system, and they just let condensation, evaporation do its thing. So water from the ocean evaporated, molecules are moving around. If they got struck by this current, then they might undergo a chemical reaction and form a more complex molecule. Then the gases would condense into this condenser and drip off into liquid. So they condense. And they ran this for several weeks. And then they analyzed the samples inside of it, and they actually created small organic molecules as well as amino acids in the soup, in the prebiotic soup in the ocean. Okay. So just within a week, 15%, bless you, of the original methane gas converted into formaldehyde and hydrogen cyanide. Now I bolded hydrogen cyanide because hydrogen cyanide can be used to make adenine. And adenine is a base pair that is found, or nucleotide I should say, found in DNA as well as RNA. Now if you take formaldehyde and hydrogen cyanide, you can combine those two to form even more simple molecules like formic acid, urea, which is like a heavy nitrogen-based compound, glycine and alanine. These are amino acids, and amino acids make up proteins. Other scientists have ran similar experiments, and they've produced more than 30 different carbon compounds, including glutamic acid, amino acid, valine, proline, aspartic acid. These are all amino acids. And when you have amino acids, you can make proteins. Okay, so on this next slide, I have 2 molecules of formaldehyde and 2 molecules of hydrogen and cyanide. And I'm just going to show you how you can take those atoms and create formic acid and urea. So pretty important molecules for life. So there it is. Did you see it? I obviously had fun with that slide. Woo! There it goes. Okay. And you know what? Hold on. I don't think I'm hooked up to my speakers. I forgot to do that.
Jeff Bada of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego has spent his career working to understand the early Earth soup of chemicals. He began under the direction of perhaps the most famous scientist in origin of life research, Stanley Miller.
There are in the history of science turning points where we suddenly see the history of Earth and life differently. In the early 1950s, Stanley Miller, the eager graduate student, and Harold Urey, the Nobel Prize-winning mentor at the University of Chicago, conducted this astonishing experiment where they made an early Earth environment.
It looks like this sort of a Frankenstein-type apparatus, but actually it's a very carefully thought-out design.
Bada sets up a modern-day test of the 1950s experiment on Miller's original lab equipment.
One flask contains water. That's to simulate the ocean. The other flask has just got the gases in it. So this is the atmosphere.
Just as it does in nature, water from the ocean evaporates and rises into the atmosphere, where it condenses and returns to the ocean. Miller simulated what he believed to be the atmosphere of early Earth, with different gases, like ammonia and methane. Then he added a spark of genius.
Miller and Urey decided to use a spark to simulate lightning because that's such a ubiquitous process in the atmosphere of the Earth.
That was the real inspiration, these little electric sparks. They acted like simulated lightning.
The energy from the spark of lightning breaks down the gas and water molecules, so they can undergo further chemical reactions.
To their astonishment, when they turned this apparatus on, after only a couple of days, you started seeing this pink color developing. And then a few more days, black, oily goo is forming around the electrodes.
The electrodes get covered with new substances, organic compounds usually associated with life.
And it wasn't just any organic compound. It was amino acids that make proteins the ingredients for life.
Amino acids are the building blocks of life. They form proteins, which are the key component of muscles and other tissues.
People thought, aha, this is a key step in the origin of life.
And you really believe that you can bring life to the dead? That body is not dead. It has never lived. I created it.
The experiment raised the fear that a Frankenstein creation, like in this classic film, was just around the corner.
People were saying they made Frankenstein in a test tube.
It's alive! I know what it feels like to be God.
Had Miller and Urey cooked up life in a test tube?
There are going to be global changes.
These changes whose consequences are now beginning to unfold, are the latest chapter in Earth's epic story. A story that began 4.5 billion years ago with a rock.
Oh, okay. Okay, so after forming this hypothesis of maybe how some early organic molecules formed, some other things that had to occur in order for life to start, you need chemical reactions or metabolic pathways. And we've talked about this where metabolic pathways probably evolved stepwise backwards, but our primitive organisms were probably autotrophic and they built everything they needed from simple organic compounds. But then maybe if they ran out of glucose, well, then they had to figure out a way to make glucose, and so you work backwards. Enzymes also emerged. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the RNA world hypothesis. So the molecule for life that kind of controls or codes for everything is DNA. But there's a hypothesis out there that says that maybe RNA was used first, and then because RNA is a little bit unstable, then DNA kind of took its place. And the reason for that is that RNA can act like an enzyme. It can copy itself. It uses ribozyme in self-replication, and so because it can copy itself and it can go back to DNA as well as create proteins, maybe RNA was the first information molecule used before DNA.
Was this kind of in the other?
Yes, this was in a previous lecture. I would like to say chapter 2 or chapter 1. It was one of those different colored slides.
I think it was in like our last lecture. Or maybe it was on the test.
Jared just Snapchatted me and he has a Mountain Dew.
Sweet. Okay, and then finally, a cell membrane had to evolve. And so when you have a cell membrane, you have a boundary between the environment and the organism, and this membrane can help increase concentration of those organic molecules inside an organism and thus increase the probability of a reaction occurring. Early membranes were probably just fatty acids instead of phospholipids. So. All right, so that does it for the second section. So we got some review questions. Miller-Urey experiment in 1953 is a classic in prebiotic chemistry. Miller and Urey attempted to simulate early Earth conditions by combining a reducing atmosphere with liquid water and lightning from electric sparks. They produced some small organic molecules, including amino acids. What can be concluded from this experiment? What? D, yes, it's possible to form organic molecules from inorganic molecules in the absence of life. Which of the following was produced in experiments on primitive Earth conditions conducted by Miller and Urey and others? Amino acids. It has also been discovered that enzyme-like catalysis can be carried out not only by enzymes but also by RNA. The early Earth reducing atmosphere is thought to have lacked which of the following gases? O2, oxygen. Okay, the rest were present. One puzzle about the origin of life on Earth relates to the origin of enzymes. Some have suggested that RNA may be served as the first enzymes helping to form polypeptides. What evidence supports this proposal?
C.
It's C. Yes, it's C. All right, moving on to early evidence of life. So we'll look at the strength of fossil evidence and how we can date the origins of life. So fossil evidence indicates life may have originated 3.2 billion years ago. You may see 3.5 in the video. You saw possibly 4.1. You're going to see fossil evidence when I talk about prokaryotes on Wednesday. But cratons, which are just kind of slabs of rocks in South Africa and Australia, have microfossils that do resemble prokaryotes and could be biological in origin. So all life prior to a few 100 million years ago was probably microscopic, so we do have some microscopic fossils, which are obviously more difficult to identify than dinosaur bones. So one strong line for evidence comes from rocks called stromatolites, these sedimentary deposits and precipitated material held in place by mats of these microorganisms. These rocks show structure nearly identical to those that are found in large bacterial mats today, as you can see in the picture on the left-hand side. And careful analysis indicates that they must have been made by living organisms. And then when we do radiometric dating, it shows that these stromatolites are approximately 3.5 billion years old. And so remember, Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. So like I said, the dates, this one says 2.7. I mean, they're kind of all over the place, honestly, but they're old. That's it. They're old. All right, so we can use isotopic data to kind of date the process because back then organisms did carbon fixation. The cyanobacteria did carbon fixation. So living organisms tend to alter their environments. Organisms tend to use carbon-12 isotope and thus alter atmospheric levels. And when you look at fossilized bodies, you're looking for increased carbon-12 isotopes versus those levels in non-organic rock. I'll talk about biomarkers more in depth with prokaryotes, but some hydrocarbons have been found in ancient rocks, and they might have a origin, from a living organism. So we call them biomarkers, just organic molecules like hydrocarbons. But like I said, I'll go into biomarkers more in depth on Wednesday with prokaryotes. All right, so that does it.
Can you go back to the last slide real quick and just-
Sure.
Already?
Okay. So this is just a diagram just showing radiometric dating and half-life, and so they're just looking for a concentration of certain isotopes because isotopes can be converted into a different isotope depending on how stable they are. But I think when we talk about prokaryotes, I go more in depth. Your book doesn't really talk about half-life in this chapter. All right, review questions. Stromatolites are It is A, layered rock-like structures formed by some cyanobacteria. It is difficult to find reliable evidence of very early fossil cells in ancient rocks. One approach is to look at ancient rocks for evidence that life may have once been present. Such evidence would include an examination of isotopes in the rock. If a scientist was comparing a possibly prokaryotic fossil to the surrounding rock, what isotopic data would indicate the presence of life? Yeah, B. Rock material derived from living things would have higher concentrations of carbon-12.
Wait, before you, can you go back to the last slide where it had C on it and then one more?
Oh, jeez, there.
Thank you.
Okay, section 4 is Earth's changing system. So I'm going to talk about the relationship between carbon dioxide levels and glaciation, and then argue that plate tectonics also plays a role in evolution of life on Earth. So Earth's climate it's always changing. We have temperatures that have ranged from 2,000 degrees Celsius to minus 50 degrees Celsius. But we know by looking at ice records, as well as rock records and everything else that we can use to look at Earth's past, Earth has been cooling overall, but there have been 3 sharp drops in the Proterozoic era that decimated life, basically snowball Earth. So you can see them here with this dark blue, dark blue, dark blue, and then we've had regional glaciation in between, which means that some parts of Earth were covered in glaciers, but not all of it.
So, like, you know how it's like, okay, so if it's cooling, I thought it was, like, now it's warming up, isn't it?
Yeah, so we are coming out of like a mini ice age, and so yes, it's warming, but it's kind of hard to describe. Like when you have to look at Earth's history as a whole, where Earth has been a lot hotter than it has been. So yes, we've talked about, what is it? What's the term? It's not global warming. We don't use global warming. We use climate change. Yeah. So we're kind of undergoing a different climate change where some areas are actually becoming colder and some areas are becoming warmer. Okay, so we can use geological events to explain some of the shifts in the atmosphere, as well as living organisms. When Earth is warm and there's lots of moisture in the air, weathering accelerates. And when you increase weathering, so the breakdown of rock, erosion, you're going to decrease atmospheric CO2. And when you decrease atmospheric CO2, as well as carbon trapped in the rocks, you're going to have decreased temperatures. Plate tectonics have also played a role because continents, they've been supercontinents, and then you break them up. So when you break them up, you expose them to more water or shoreline, and that's going to increase weathering and as a result, decrease CO2 levels. With plate tectonics, continents have moved, and that affects evolution because when you break up continents, now you have some type of isolation taking place that allows organisms to undergo diversification, and then we have continents that collide, and so then those animals cross these land bridges and they get mixed up again. So it's, it plays a role in how genes are moved. Can I move on?
Hold on, 2 seconds. Collisions for...
Okay. So throughout Earth's history, as you saw in that short YouTube video we watched, life has changed. Earth's early history had low levels of oxygen. And now we have pretty good amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. And so as a result, some of the organisms that didn't require oxygen, they had to move to an area where there was no oxygen because oxygen is poison to them. But when we release oxygen through the process of photosynthesis, other animals needed to utilize that oxygen. So now they do cellular respiration. So we have the evolution of cellular respiration, how they can use oxygen as well as carbohydrates to create energy. Not only that, with oxygen being released, oxygen can react in the atmosphere and form ozone, which is O3. And ozone protects us from UV. So that was a good thing, good benefit to that. Your book then goes on to this hypothesis, did plants contribute to glaciations? Because when plants colonized on land, we saw gradual cooling and some abrupt glaciation in the Ordovician period. Plants release organic acids and thus increase rock weathering. And remember, increased weathering decreases CO2 levels. We also saw a second glaciation event in the Devonian period with vascular plants and how they evolved. And so vascular plants just means they have xylem and phloem, and now they have roots, and that also increases weathering. And when you increase weathering, you decrease CO2 levels. So there's just a hypothesis that maybe plants contributed to the glaciation events of Earth. Okay, so this is a graph just showing how atmospheric oxygen levels have changed over Earth's history. And as you can see, where they're at today, but they were a lot higher in earlier periods. Okay, review questions. A scientist is examining fossil impressions in rocks of single-celled prokaryotic organisms. The rocks have been dated to 3 billion years old, or 3 billion years ago. The scientist concludes that the prokaryotic organisms depended on aerobic respiration. Why is this conclusion probably erroneous? Am I saying that right? Erroneous?
What does that mean?
Incorrect, probably, or
Okay.
so with, yes, it's A. Yep. Chemical composition of gases surrounding Earth has changed substantially over the past 4 billion years. One notable change was due to the emergence of organisms that photosynthesize. Their photosynthesis increased the amount of which of the following gases in the atmosphere?
A, oxygen, D.
It's D, oxygen. Ever-changing life on Earth. So I'm going to talk about, again, the endomembrane system, which is the nucleus, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, as well as endosymbiosis, mitochondria and chloroplast, and then discuss the different types of cell specialization for multicellular life. So in the Archean eon, that's where we saw first signs of our prokaryotes. And so this single-celled organism had to evolve into bacteria, or eubacteria, which is a very, very abundant domain. I mean, just in your mouth, you have more bacteria in your mouth than you do mammals on all of Earth. Okay, so yeah.
Is that why people say like dogs have cleaner mouths than you do or something?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But we'll talk about the bacteria or the prokaryotes more in depth on Wednesday and Thursday, but they do play critical roles in biogeochemical cycles, but they also are responsible for disease. Archaea, which means that these organisms tend to live in extreme environments, as you can see, hot and cold and acidic conditions. So we'll talk more about them on Wednesday and Thursday. And then our Eukarya, which there's like 6 different classes or groups of them. And these are terms this is the first time I've seen these terms. But we have the excavata, which means they lack mitochondria. The chromoviolata, you don't need to write these. If you want to take a picture at the end, sure, but Archaeplastidia, chloroplasts for photosynthesis. We'll talk about the rhizera and amoebas later on in a different unit. Yeah, but like I said, this is the first time I've seen these terms in the book. So yeah, just throwing it out there. Looking at the phylogenetic tree or cladogram of all of these eukaryotes versus the prokaryotes. Bacteria evolved first, followed by archaea, and then we have our eukaryotes. So then I was like, what the heck are these organisms? Because, I didn't know that there was life or cells that lacked mitochondria. So then I looked it up. So wait, which word am I looking for? Excavata. Never mind, I guess it's not even it. Oh, there it is down here. Diplomonoids, parabasalids, euglenoids. These are protists. There's some more protists. And these guys are really crazy. So yeah, anyways, I just decided to look it up.
And you decided that we're not going to do anything on protists?
I guess not. Because protists are technically eukaryotes. And they don't really fit with prokaryotes and viruses.
What class is in there right now?
I thought it was a study.
Is
Okay.
anyone else taking anatomy next year?
What did you say?
Are you taking anatomy next
I
year?
don't know yet.
Gonna see who teaches it?
Yeah. That's what I'm waiting for.
What are the odds that you'll actually get to
Well, I'm not overload this semester. So,
it's like your second semester?
Because anatomy is second semester, isn't it? Or
Yeah.
it can be.
I think so. I just don't know what hour that is. So,
I was talking to my mom about it, and she's like, I want Miss Erickson to teach you that class. I was like, yeah, me too.
Darren's on the school board.
Yeah, true. She'd be like, yeah.
Do they actually decide who the school board decides that?
No, you can push it though.
I think you should push it because I feel like I need to take it, but am I not trying to be rude to him or anything, but I
Yep,
just
okay.
feel
We're recording, so moving on. All right, so with eukaryotes, okay, one of the things that defines eukaryotes is this compartmentalization, where chemical reactions take place in certain organelles. So prokaryotes dominated life for the first billion years, and then we have this evolution of an endomembrane system. We had a nucleus. Nucleus stores DNA. We add control to which genes are being expressed. And then we have the Golgi apparatus and the endoplasmic reticulum that facilitates or are responsible for that intracellular transport, so movement of molecules within with vesicles. And then endosymbiosis, how the chloroplast and mitochondria involved. And I'm not really going to talk about these because you watched a video on it with Mr. Anderson. We've discussed endosymbiosis in the past, but there's a diagram just showing how they evolved, got swallowed up, and benefited from each other and have just coexisted ever since. Another thing that sets eukaryotes apart is that some eukaryotes can be multicellular, and when you are multicellular, you can have cell specialization. So cells that carry out just specific jobs for that organism. And this allows cells to deal with environments in new ways. Cells talk to each other, they coordinate, they work together. And based on those 6 groups that I just showed you, the excavata, can't even think of another word, but excavata and the other ones, multicellularity has evolved independently in those supergroups. So it wasn't supergroup, or it wasn't multicellular and then everyone branched off from it. It appeared in those supergroups by themselves. And then with eukaryotes, I mean, yes, there are some eukaryotes that can reproduce asexually, but now we have sexual reproduction, which is going to increase our genetic diversity. So meiosis, you have two parents with a combination of their DNA, and we also have crossing over that occurs in meiosis. Okay, last but not least, so this is our final slide of notes, the Cambrian Explosion. So after the Hadean, Archean, Protozoic, we enter the Phanerozoic, and one of the first periods is the Cambrian period. And we had this massive explosion or branching out of different body plans of animals that still exist today. And so what I mean by body plans, we have like echinoderms, you have worms, you have the arthropods and their number of digits, you have the sponges, like they're still around today. And so all of these body plans had some major innovation that helped them thrive in their environment, but some of those innovations allowed some organisms to move on to land. And so we'll talk about that when we get to protozoans and deuterostomes, but just know that the Cambrian Explosion is kind of where it started. Okay, review questions. Compared to living in water, living on land produces many challenges. One development which led organisms colonize land habitats was, this one we didn't talk about, but I'm sure you could figure it out. No, almost all living things have a mitochondria, so it's like, which one of these doesn't fit? Like, specifically, what's like one that's for land?
B or C?
It's either B or C. Now, there is aquatic plants, so they probably have chloroplast.
C.
So it's C. Stomata are the tiny little openings for gas exchange. Yeah. Oh, yeah, leaves, duh. Yes. The event called the Cambrian Explosion resulted in an abrupt increase in B, diversity of major animal groups. What is the most likely origin of chloroplast and mitochondria?
It's A.
It's A.
I
Even
just
though
looked
you
at
just,
endo.
I looked at
yeah, but then B also had endo, but I'm just like, I'm just going to
Oh,
take it. I'm just going to take it. It's A. Okay. The origin of mitochondria and chloroplast by endosymbiosis hypothesized that these organelles originated by
What'd you say?
close, not that one.
Did you say E?
Because it's saying that it got swallowed by bacteria.
Oh, is it C?
Yes, it's C. So a eukaryotic cell swallowed a prokaryote. So it's C. Final slide. Which of the following occurred first in eukaryotic evolution?
Ooh, it's C.
It's C. And then which of the following would not belong to the domain Eukarya? Which means that euc, nuke.
C.
It's C. Okay. Yeah.
Can you go back to 26.5C for a second?